this is why it's so intimidating for a homeowner, and why homeowner might lose interest. They call the builder and say like, hey, I want to add a place on my property, and the builder isn't able to answer immediately. Look, I have to read the code for 4 hours. I have to call the town. I have to check all these overlays, and let me get back to you in 1 to 4 weeks. And I think the lesson here is that's a hard question that the homeowner wants. But if you're answering that same hard question over and over again, then that question needs a system.
Welcome back, everybody. Chris G here, Hard Hat CEO, and today we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. I actually had to look it up because I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about. But once I realized this is going to be a great episode. And to help me get there, I got Avi Kaufman all the way from Massachusetts. Avi's going to talk about some stuff here today, AI and investing, and not necessarily investing, but how we can invest in some properties and so forth. And as you know, I love talking about real estate. So that being said, help me welcome Avi. Avi, how you doing today?
Great, Chris. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm very excited to have our conversation and to talk about ADUs and AI and everything else.
Well, ADU, we're going to get in that in just a minute. Before we get started on that, I did notice you are a veteran of our military. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Actually, I spent some time in your neck of the woods.
You did?
I was down at Fort Leonard Wood.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's great. Well, thank you for your service. I had a lot of friends that joined the military out of high school. Well, that being said, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get started?
Well, yes, certainly. I worked for many years as a real estate broker. And in that capacity, I was helping people try and find homes, and came across again and again the challenges, the housing crisis. Just houses were getting more expensive and hard to build, and at the same time working with builders and developers and investors. And a lot of the challenge is just knowing even what you're allowed to build on any given lot, where zoning was one of the factors that made it difficult to know. And I realized that a turning point for me was realizing zoning is not just a compliance or what are you allowed to build issue, but it can actually be a strength for contractors that can turn that into something that drives their business, is understanding more quickly than their competitors what is allowed.
Well, let's address the elephant in the room. What is an ADU?
An ADU it stands for accessory dwelling unit. So it's an in-law apartment or backyard cottage. These have been around for forever, but they've gained new prominence in the past decade. It started in the West Coast, where California, then Washington and Oregon legalized these about 10 years ago, and every year have been expanding the protections for them at the state law, and basically telling the individual municipalities like, look, we have a crisis, you have to allow these. And it's made a huge difference. ADUs are now the #1 type of building permit in California.
Now, is it because they weren't considered a permanent dwelling and now they are?
It was because in traditional single family zoning, you couldn't build anything other than a single family and
on the property.
Okay. And the property, could support more. And the demand was, a lot of the demand is really from people needing to age in place or a caretaker or just for rental income to pay the mortgage. And so now other states that have housing crisis are following this playbook. So it's going across the country. We're seeing more and more municipalities, and even at the state level, we're seeing favorable laws. Here where I am, Massachusetts, across New England, we're seeing more favorable laws in Colorado, Arizona, Texas, some at the municipality level, some at the state level, because this is a way for every homeowner to become a small scale developer and to support their community and their family.
That was one of my questions I was going to ask, is there a place that works better than others? I mean, large population areas would be good, but even, I've got we're in a small community, and I deal with zoning, even in my little town of 1,000 people. So I'm sure it's important everywhere.
For sure. And even in a town of 1,000 people, you're still going to have people whose parents need a place to age in place, or their kids need a place to get started. I mean, this is not limited to high population areas. Certainly the demand for housing is higher in high population areas just by the numbers, but this is a very human. I mean, think about how we evolved over, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. We evolved in these communities and these tribes, and our current zoning doesn't really have room for that. And so I think we're also just seeing a very human connection to this type of development.
Well, as I told you earlier, I don't have a program as far as I just think of things. And you mentioned community. I think about my Amish. I have Amish crews, and they work. And matter of fact, they just build a house right next door, and mom and dad move in, or they build right next door and they move in, and everybody takes care of one another.
I love it.
Other than, I assume the obvious is that the fact that you don't have to purchase land in addition to, because you already own the land or you're buying the land. Well, is there any other cost savings besides that big chunk not have to come out at the beginning?
I think you're spot on. That is the biggest savings. A lot of the cost of real estate is the location, the land itself. So if you're doing it on your current land, whether as part of the existing house or as a detached structure, the land is the single biggest savings. Now, if you're doing it within the current envelope of the building, like converting a basement, converting an attic, that also huge cost savings versus building new. If you are building fresh, like a detached backyard cottage, yeah, I mean, you have to think of it like building a small house. It doesn't scale in terms of like the cost per square foot is going to seem high because you still have to do the foundation, you still have to do the utility connections, all of that. There's a lot of fixed costs, but at the end of the day, you're getting a small house at a fraction of the price that it would have cost you to buy land and build a house.
Well, some of those are, I'm thinking, some of that's already, you've been established, like a driveway. You're going to extend that or even use the current one you have. A lot of the utilities are currently there. You just have to either add a meter or however you want to design your area. So those costs are litigated or minimalized anyway. I'm just thinking about this new construction I'm doing. I'm having to add all that stuff for this client. That adds $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the project.
Oh yeah,
for the expense, and that's not counting the land. That's once they got it, and I got to do it to even get to the point where I can build.
Absolutely. I'd say one thing, like if you are on septic, then you might still have to do, if your current septic supports whatever your current 3-bedroom house, and now you're adding a 2-bedroom cottage, that is still a cost you'll have to do, but there could still be some savings around the margins there. But and like you said, the driveway or existing utilities, if the detached structure is not too far away, then you can often reuse or repurpose those.
Sure. Before we get into AI and how that can help us, I want to talk about the financing of that. And obviously you've done it or experienced it. Are banks, is it considered like a primary residence? I know, so I'm a landlord and I get different rates for interest rates than I do with my primary home because of the safety. If the bank knows that it's going to be a primary residence, well, I guess it's not really a primary residence. Is it going to be higher rates?
It's a very smart question because this is a evolving area. We're seeing a lot of development in the area of how do you finance these, and the answer is not always straightforward. Most people honestly finance these with equity lines or equity loans
of the current property.
On the current property, especially if you already own or occupy the main house, then that's, in the current environment, that tends to be the least expensive way to move forward and the quickest way.
Sure.
As long as you're not splitting the ownership of the property, so you are still the primary owner. So it is your primary residence.
And in a way, you're adding, at the end of the day, it's always the banks till you pay it off. You're adding an asset to their current asset, basically. You're improving the asset at best.
That's right. And so some people will do a construction loan. Some people will do refinance. But just with the way interest rates are now and the environment around the financing, the equity lines seem to be the current winner for how to do it. Although some banks are coming out with specific ADU loan programs. I would check with the local community banks. They tend to have a little bit more flexibility or a little bit more insight into what's needed. But let's say you don't have enough equity in the house to finance the ADU or whatever the project is,
Mhm.
they do have some of them will have special loans that will get you above the threshold so that you can construct it.
Is it advantageous? Let's say that grandma's moving in, or not
Mhm.
moving in, but she needs a place and she needs to be closer across the yard there. Is it advantageous to get a surveyor in and lop off that part, or and this is going to come in the code part that we're going to talk about? Is that even legal in some places?
California is leading there, where they have this bill where you can split lots pretty easily and you build 2 single families and 2 ADUs even. But in most of the rest of the country, it's more municipality by municipality, where you have to check, see if you have enough frontage, enough lot size to do that. In terms of, is it advantageous financially? It depends.
Possibly, kind of
Possibly.
the scenario that you're dealing with.
It very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can turn one property into 2 and build 2 single families and then maybe 2 ADUs, then sure. I mean, definitely some.
The
And if you
sky's
can
the
sell
limit.
but it does depend on your goal too. I mean, if your
Sure.
goal is to have grandma close, then you probably don't want a huge separation there. That if your goal is to maximize the resale value, then the more you build, the more you have there. So.
Well, before we get into that, next question for you, I was thinking, if you can't build out, you go up, but you got to be careful on that part because if you don't understand zoning, anything over a multi-family becomes a different issue in itself, right?
It very much can, and again, it's municipality by municipality. They'll have different rules. I mean, we've seen the thing to understand about zoning is that it's almost like archaeology. You're looking at this document. Every municipality, 30,000 across the U.S. or so, each has a document between 50 and 3,000 pages of dense legalese assembled over decades and decades, written by committee, sometimes contradicting itself. So,
Oh, I imagine.
you try and ask, and this is why it's so intimidating for a homeowner, and why homeowner might lose interest. They call the builder and say, like, hey, I want to add a place on my property, and the builder isn't able to answer immediately. Look, I have to read the code for 4 hours. I have to call the town. I have to check all these overlays, and let me get back to you in 1 to 4 weeks. And I think the lesson here is that's a hard question that the homeowner wants. But if you're answering that same hard question over and over again, then that question needs a system. And if you can use a system around that, then you as a contractor, as a builder, can turn that into a huge competitive advantage in getting these projects, winning these projects, and succeeding in building those projects, building that trust with the homeowner early. And by the way, we're doing ADUs first, but we're also going to do single families as well. And we're adding more property types.
Well, that leads us to where we're going with how can we do that efficiently? And you have a system for that. Can you tell us how that happens?
Yeah, well, so I'm the co-founder and chief real estate officer of, I probably should have said this in the intro.
No, you're doing great. This is right where we want to be.
Okay. Well, I'm the co-founder and chief real estate officer at FutureLot, and we make a software that is for builders. And the idea is you can type in an address and we tell you what you're allowed to build there. Now, right now, as we're recording today in February, we cover 21 states. And we cover accessory dwelling units, and we're adding single family homes very soon. We're going to add more states. If you see a need in your state, if you're a listener, let me know and we'll put your state in front. But we're trying to do, our goal is to cover the whole US and to answer the question across the board for residential use. What am I allowed to build here? And what are the red flags? What are the layers? What are the key things that a builder needs to know to have that conversation and that first contact with that homeowner and move forward with confidence?
Forgive me, Avi. I'm making a couple of notes here. I want to forget my questions. It's one of those, and then the other one was there we go. So based on that conversation, let's say my little town of 1,000. Now, let me back up here. I'm assuming that your system uses AI to read the code.
We do.
In a way.
We do. So we're using AI, also humans, also traditional data science. I mean, we're using a lot of different tools.
Okay.
We're gathering data from a lot of different sources for things like wetlands, parcel data, structure data, historic overlays, depending on the geography, sinkholes, volcanoes, earthquake activity, all of that. That's sort of traditional data analysis. We're also using to read I mentioned the zoning bylaws are so monumentally difficult. And so we've developed this AI system to help pull out the critical pieces. And then we have a human oversight piece on top of that, because I mean, look, the AI is incredibly useful and great, but it's not perfect.
Sure.
And we combine it all together on a visual map overlay for the builder, where they can see the lot, they can pull their own floor plans on there, and they can make a very attractive, we call it a pre-feasibility report. Because so they can pull that all into PDF, bring it with them to that first homeowner meeting, or talk to the homeowner on the phone from that first contact, and they get that in seconds. And so the reason we call it pre-feasibility, on the question of the AI,
Yeah.
The answer is pretty good, but if you're going to go ahead and build the project, you still have to do your full analysis. The point of this is to give you a directional and help you understand what those red flags, what those constraints might be for that particular location. It will never replace actually doing the survey of the property, going through all the things you have to do to file a permit.
Right.
But we try and get you to that point sooner and get you to be able to have that confidence, and help the homeowner have the confidence that it's a worthwhile process to do.
To answer some basic questions that, that might not, I deal with zoning more than I want sometimes. And it's just a definition of how you interpret the statement. And like I said, sometimes it's conflicting, and it's like, whatever. And you don't want to argue with them, and that's not the point. It's just like, this doesn't make sense to me.
Right. But if you do have to argue with them, you want to know, okay, look, in section 213.4, it says that I'm allowed to do 30% floor area ratio if I'm more than 20 feet from the lot line. My plan shows that. And if you have the citation and you can do it, then you can have that conversation with whether you're right or wrong, you can have an intelligent conversation with the zoning official. And even before that, talking to the homeowner, you can say, like, look, it seems to say that the setback is 20 feet. But this is something that impacts your project. This is an area that we should investigate further. So that's what we're doing, is we're surfacing those issues from the first moment. Or, even something really basic like, look, yes, we can build in your backyard, but you have a pretty steep slope back there. It's no big deal, but it's going to require some site work.
One of my questions I had was about, I mentioned I'm in a small community, but we're real close to Columbia, Missouri, which has their zoning and rules online. So that's why AI finds it. In my smaller community, we probably don't have, I can get access to it, go get a printed copy, but I don't necessarily have it online. Is there ways to help our communities get that information? Is it like contact you guys and you guys can have it available? Or just, is it one of those things where just talk to them about getting it on their website?
Yeah, I mean, if the town wants to send us theirs, we're always welcome. We welcome it.
Sure.
But we do quite an extensive process to try and find them where they are. And so a lot of them, I mean, it's a real hodgepodge. We've got, some are the electronic online codes, some are PDFs. In very small communities, sometimes it's, written on the back of a napkin and someone's, but we'll take whatever we can get and we try and digitize it.
Okay. How, you mentioned something earlier that made me think of this question on planning. We talked about a little bit about just the fact of you got a house and you want to build what you currently have. Well, what about places where I'm talking to a gentleman now about, he's going to build and he knows he wants to build later on some more stuff, like the house for grandma, or I guess even a pool house where it's a temporary, guests come in, they're not living with me while they're visiting and they're going to be gone. But all that does still qualify. So how can you use this in the planning stage where there's no property there, but you can kind of say, well, here's where this needs to go and this is where this needs to go. Here's what the rules say about the septic and so forth.
So we're moving in that direction where we're adding more of those types of things that you can add. The way the software works today is really centered around, you have an existing house and what can you add to it in terms of an accessory dwelling unit. But probably by the time you publish this, we'll have single family. I mean, we're on the verge of adding single family and seeing what kind of addition or you can add to that. And then we'd love to add more things, so as people are using it, and we're a small team, we're a startup.
Sure.
If you're using this and you're like, look, I need to do 100, whatever, I'm going to make something up, greenhouses,
Yeah.
Give us that feedback. And we do let the builders, by the way, you can upload whatever floor plans you want. And you can use it to visualize on the lot. And when you print out the report for the homeowner, you get that PDF and it shows exactly as you laid it out. So you can annotate it however you want. I mean, you can upload a greenhouse plan or a pool house plan or, whatever you want.
Right.
In terms of the zoning report, right now it's centered around these sort of specific uses.
Sure. Before I get, it's not necessarily off topic. It's just one question I have. But by adding the ADUs, we are actually kind of freeing up housing. I mean, I was thinking about ways that it's helping the housing market. Obviously, it makes it less expensive as far as the property, but it also frees up things by, I mentioned grandma. If grandma's moving out of her house, that makes it available to somebody else. And then that helps the whole system just keep churning, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, where I live, I'll say like our neighbor, I see on two different sides. We have neighbors in large houses where it's like one or two people in the house. And, a lot of times people feel, I don't know about their cases specifically that they feel stuck, but a lot of people feel stuck in their home where, it's expensive to maintain and they don't need whatever 4,000 square feet of or whatever size.
Right.
But at the same time, senior housing is very expensive and you don't want to leave your community and you don't want to go far away and spend all your money on sort of that senior housing. So ADUs accomplish multiple things. One is it is a way for you to downsize, but still stay in your current community. It's a way for you to keep family close. It just opens up a lot of options. And so, yeah, it does free up the main house if the owner moves to a beautiful new ADA compliant single floor home. It certainly opens that up.
Good for the economy, good for everything. It sounds
It's good for
like.
everything. It's good for, even just childcare. Like, I
Oh,
would love it
yeah?
if my parents were here.
Grandma, hey.
Yeah, like I got to run out. The kids are here.
Well, I was fortunate. That's the way I grew up. Not necessarily, but we were on the same property, just a half mile. And when you're kids, you just walk it and go see grandma. But I don't want to necessarily shift gears, but I do want to change the topic briefly. I was watching a documentary the other day about tiny homes. And when I read, my notes about our podcast today, I was thinking, how could this be used for tiny homes? Or isn't it like the planning? And I guess it has to do with the rules of the community. For those who don't know what tiny homes are, they're basically either one bedroom micro sheds almost. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean about it, but it's very economical. It helps the homeless. It helps those who don't have the financial means to have a true home. Can be a rental, can be government sponsored, or that's a lot of different ways it can be set up. But more importantly, in my question to you, Ava, is that it can plan out a property for that, couldn't it?
Well, so it's not really
Or
designed to do that
potentially?
quite yet. Potentially, that's a potential future use. I would say it's kind of like, a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. Like there's a lot of overlap between ADUs and tiny homes, for sure. But and I think there's an important distinction to make for the audience too.
Please, because I'm just like, I just thought of it when we're talking here. It's like,
yeah. Well, a tiny home is, as you said, it's a small home, and sometimes they're often tiny, and and you might take a property and like a single property and put down a dozen or dozens of them, and you might do it for a low-cost housing development, or for homeless, or for a camping or recreation, like in
that's
a beautiful spot. And
like,
I mean, I can imagine in a
Southern
lot of
Missouri,
places, Southern Missouri,
we have
and the Ozarks.
cabins.
Yeah, exactly. It could be a nice place to go visit. But that's a very specific use. An ADU, it may be a small detached cottage or tiny home, as you will, in your backyard, but it can also be larger. An ADU could be an apartment over your garage. It could be your basement conversion. It could be an addition. So not all ADUs are actually accessory buildings. Some of them are part of the main house, part of the garage. So there's definitely overlap between the two, and a tiny home style could be what you use for your ADU.
Gotcha.
But, you know, I've also seen ADUs that cost, I mean, we saw one that was like over $600,000 to construct. I mean, it was, I mean, some people, you could spend $1 million building one.
Sure.
There's a whole range.
Space in your budget. And
exactly. I mean, the sky's the limit.
If you put a ADU above your garage, for example, is it still considered an ADU? Or what definition? Or does the fact that maybe I add another electric meter or something separate? I bought properties in the past that somebody had an old house, a big old farmhouse, and they made it into like a 4-room apartments, and they added the meters to it, so everybody got a separate meter. Well, now it's separate, obviously individual apartments. But if a person's adding it to their garage and not changing any utilities, it's still considered ADU. Yeah, I guess in the eyes of the government. In
the eyes of the government, so it doesn't always make logical sense, right?
Well, imagine that.
Imagine that the definition. Yeah. So like, why? Like, if you just have a separate apartment, why is that not a 2-family, right?
Right.
So if your home is still classified as a single family, like maybe you're not allowed to have a 2-family there. Although sometimes 2 families are allowed to have ADUs as well. But the ADU is usually defined as it has to have independent living facilities. So it has to have a kitchen, bathroom. Usually it has to have its own separate entrance. It may or may not need to have its own utilities, especially, you know, if it's someone, you say you have grandma in there,
right?
You don't really need separate utilities.
No, not really. I mean,
what do you do?
Person, yeah. Especially if you have empty nester and you're having 2 kids and you're moving one adult in for 2. That's a win-win, probably.
Exactly. But so really, it has to do with how it's defined in that municipality's code. But usually, it's often limited in size. So it might say it has to be. I mean, we've seen limits anywhere from 700 square feet to 1,500 square feet. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's requirements that are, so let's say that your zone only allows single family homes. And so then it might have requirements depending on the municipality saying one or the other of the structures has to have the owner of the property in it. Like, you can't rent out both halves. Although in other places like California and Massachusetts, you can rent out both, which makes it attractive to investors.
Well, the real benefit here is that you guys help people figure that out.
Exactly. Yeah, we try and get those rules upfront to you so that you can evaluate and have that conversation with the homeowner and decide if it's worth pursuing. Before
we wrap up, how can contractors use your services to increase their sales and at the end of the day, and you know what I'm getting at? How can they use it to benefit not only themselves, but, you know, their clients?
Yeah, I think that's the multi-million-dollar question, right?
Right.
That's what we want to do. And that's our purpose, is to support builders. So if you want to focus on a certain line, like ADUs, then you need a system around how do you get those leads? How do you qualify those leads? How do you figure out which ones are pursuable and which ones are buildable? So, you know, we work with a bunch of ADU builders, and typically they'll run ads and get people to their websites. Mm-hmm. And then the question, how do you know, a typical builder website, the homeowner goes to it and reads through about us and, oh yeah, I see some pictures, and then bounces in 20 seconds, right?
Exactly.
So we give to the builders that work with us, we give them a light version they put on their own websites that engages the homeowner. They can pull on the builder's actual floor plans onto their lot. And it's a light version, but it engages on average.
It's enough to get somebody to ask the next question. I need to know more. Yeah,
exactly. That's the purpose. And then, you know, they spend like 8 minutes on this tool just playing around. Then they reach out to the homeowner, or the builder sees that they're on there and reaches out to them. And then the builder has access to the full pre-feasibility, and they say, look, you're in this zone. That's great. These are your setbacks. This is the lot coverage map. You know, they don't have to share all the zoning details, but they can say, here, I ran this report. Let's go over it. And then from there, you know, you develop with the homeowner that really, you impress that homeowner immediately. So some ADU builders, if you're really trying to systemize this, then you might have like a dedicated person, or even some of the bigger ones we work with have whole staff of, you might call them like inside sales reps, but
Sure.
really they're reaching out to the homeowners and helping them do this pre-qualification. And then once they get past that step, then the builder might go out to the lot, but you don't want to waste your time driving if there's no shot, right?
No, exactly right. So they
Right.
help you
So
kind of pre-plan too. You know the answer before you get there.
yeah.
This
And
will
then
make sense or not.
exactly. And then if the homeowner is still on board, then typically the next step is, well, a model we've seen successful is you charge the homeowner, you say, okay, the next step is to go from pre-feasibility to the full feasibility study. And for most builders, this is actually a little bit of a loss leader. Like you're going to charge the homeowner like $500 or $1,000 just so that they have skin in the game and have like a interest in there. But
Sure.
that's when you do that, like your traditional full, like you've already given them our PDF for free, right? And you've
Right.
like gone through that whole thing. And so you feel confident, but now that they've written you a check for $500 or $1,000, like they're in it, right? Like they have a vested, they're not just shopping it around.
They're serious about moving forward and
serious.
getting some more information. Yeah.
Then you go to the planning phase, and depending on your model, if you're doing modular or stick built or what have you, that can look different. But you know, a typical building phase, it might cost, you know, you say, okay, we've gone through the feasibility. It's time to do the survey and submit the building permits and do a two-step with the town and like, you know, go back and forth and argue over what we're allowed to do. So that can be, you know, $15,000, $20,000. And then you go into the full build phase. And so that's sort of like the typical sales pattern that we see.
Sure. Well, to wrap up, how would they get hold of you if my listeners would be interested in offering that to their clients or potential clients?
Check us out at FutureLot.com or reach out to me. I'm Avi, that's AVI, at FutureLot.com, and love to hear what you think, and happy to give a demo. And I'll mention we have a 30-day free trial as well, if you want to just run it inside your existing process and see how it works.
Awesome. Avi, I appreciate all your time today. It's been great. As always, if you guys like what you heard today, please hit like and share and subscribe and all those good things that help people like me move forward and help others get acknowledgement of the super content we get. This is Chris G, Hard Hat the CEO. God be with you till we meet again. Bye-bye.